The irony about having a webinar in which we invite homeowners to talk about their experiences is that Celia, Susan Lauer, and I ourselves live in Maharishi Vastu Homes. And so we could do a similar webinar just with ourselves, but it wouldn't be nearly as much fun as having some beloved friends talk about their own experiences from the outside. And so I'm really glad that Richard and Gail and Cesar and Joel have been willing to join us tonight. All of you are here because you're familiar with Vastu and you're familiar with how Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who is known worldwide for having introduced the transcendental meditation technique to the world, restored the ancient Vedic system of Vastu, the system of natural law-based construction, to have all of the effects that the Vedic literature proposed that if it's properly practiced, it can have. And so each of us who are participants in this call are very grateful because we're finding that this is a real thing. The Vedic literature and Maharishi have described that the effects of living in houses which are designed using many of the same organizing principles that nature uses in its own structures, which maintain the relationship between the individual structure, and cosmic intelligence, that the effect of living in a house that is built using these same kind of principles is that it will promote our good health, our happiness, our family harmony, success in our endeavors in the world, and growth to enlightenment. And, you know, initially these were kind of hypothetical. And there's been quite a bit of research now, including surveys, which have validated these breathtaking ancient descriptions. But what is, and we've been through quite a bit of that in prior webinars, which are available online to listen to. But what is more intimate is to hear from people who live in Vastu themselves. And I will tell you that we have not prepped our participants. We haven't told them at all what we want them to say. What they say will be just completely genuine and from them. And so with that, we will first hear from Cesar. And before we do, I'm going to share my screen and show you a few photographs of Cesar's beautiful house in California. This is Cesar's home in the mountains in central northern California. It's a Spanish style house, Spanish colonial style, the style which is dominant traditionally in much of California. He has a beautiful large piece of property with on almost a hilltop and with forests surrounding the cleared area at the top of the hill. Here is a view of the east side of the house, of the entry to the house. The house is beautifully executed. We see, for instance, wrought iron railings between piers that form the balustrades around the 2 stories of east balconies and the clay tile roofs in the traditional Spanish style mode. Here's a view from the 1st story east veranda, seeing, I think they're goats, Cesar will have to clarify for us, that are grazing in his yard. Here's a view on the left of the north entrance. Yes, and the south of the west veranda on the right. Just to show you the north side of the house, I found this photograph. This is not Cesar, but this is me. And when I visited his house about 8 years ago, there was a couple who wanted to build Vastu who Cesar permitted to join us. And this is them standing next to me. This is the interior. This is Cesar's living room, and behind it, dining room, and to the left, his kitchen. It's an open plan on the 1st floor, and bright and airy and beautiful. And here's another view with the living room in the foreground, the dining room in the background, his own office, his home office, you see through a large opening center left in the photograph. You can see above in this photo that there is an opening in the second story floor that lets sunlight, which comes in through a cupola, down from the second floor into the first floor. And also on the far left, we see an archway that frames the entry area to the house. Here's one of two nice photos that we'll see of his kitchen. It's a nice eat-in kitchen with a large central bar that he's able to eat at. And here's another view from the other side of the kitchen looking back towards both the dining room and his office. And here is the master bedroom. And with that, I'm going to invite Cesar to join us, and we'll have a chat about what it's like to live in his home. So Cesar, please do join us now. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I have to sort of add a little bit to your photos. Those photos actually were taken when the home was just recently completed. There has been furnishings, particularly art placed on the walls. I have to say that I have had a great opportunity to enjoy the benefits of living in my home.
Lovely. Can you tell us anything that may come to mind regarding what it feels like living in your home compared to your previous non-Vastu home?
I'd like to tell you why I decided to build a Vastu home.
Okay.
And the reason is that it relies on my initial experience with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's teaching at the age of 18. When I learned transcendental meditation, I had a very wonderful experience, which translated to a significant evolution in my intellect, which permitted me then to go from being an okay student to an outstanding student, which permitted me to then get an Ivy League education and get a medical degree and practice medicine, which has permitted me then to sort of live the wonderful life I have lived practicing the profession that I was born to practice. Having that very strong understanding of this information, this knowledge, I thought when I heard Maharishi talk that, he wanted people to do two things. He wanted people to practice either transcendental meditation twice a day or the TMCD program in groups and live in Vastu. So then I just decided, well, that's the instruction. I will live in Vastu. And I actually went on and for some time looked for land, found a 20-acre piece of land. And the moment that I walked into the property, I made an offer. I then purchased and closed escrow, went through a series of different designs, and built a home that you have seen in the photos. I never had stayed in the home while it was being constructed. So following the inauguration of the Vastu, which is a beautiful experience where you celebrate the home and the knowledge that actually leads to the creation of this home. As I was walking out through the gate of the Vastu, I felt like a pop, and I realized the difference between being in the Vastu and outside of the Vastu. It was actually a very, very obvious experience to me. And that obvious experience continues to be present. When I am in the experience of living there is joyful. I have been able, so when you build a home, everything is there by intention. Every light fixture, every piece of wall covering, everything, the floor, the way the water flows, you know why it is there. And you have, I mean, for myself and my guest, it's very, very joyful to be there. My daughters have their best sleep there. And, you know, I mean, I can continue going on, but it has actually been a great source of satisfaction for me. It's said to be a fortune creating home, and that is actually very, very extensive. But I have to tell you that when I start furnishing the home, I would order and pay for one item from Pottery Barn, and many times I would have to receive 2 items for the same thing for the price of one, which then would necessitate me to send the other one back. One of my beautiful carpets that I have in my home actually is free because they sent me the wrong carpet. I put it up, and then I realized it was the wrong carpet. I called the shipper, said, keep that one, we'll send you the right one. So, I mean, it was actually, this being my experience over and over again, that, you know, good things happen when you're there.
Let me ask you one more question, which is, have you had house guests? Of course, your daughters. Any others? What do people tend to notice when they visit your house? What do they mention to you?
Well, I have had many people comment on it, including even the UPS driver who helped me bring in the refrigerator into the home. And there are a couple of common comments. It's the silence. My meditation hall is just this, you know, I have, you know, it's a beautiful experience to be there. But the light, and you know, it's a happy place. I have to sort of, you know, as a little tangent, I had wonderful parents, and my parents had an amazing home where I grew up. I mean, it was a party house, perfectly designed for celebration. And when I went out to design this Vastu home, taking into consideration Vastu and the difference in climate between the tropics, Puerto Rico, and Northern California, but I incorporated that same kind of flavor from my parents' home in the home. And when my youngest daughter came into the home for the first time when it was completed, she said, Dad, it reminds me of Grandma's house. And when she said that, I told myself, I got it. I have it. And that actually has been my experience ever since.
Let me ask you one more question, which your answer just led into. You mentioned your youngest daughter, and one of our members of our audience has written in a question, what impact on kids have you noticed regarding their personality, their career, their health, etc.?
Well, you know, I actually, so I can't compare to anyone else because I only have 2. The N is equals 2. But I would have to quote someone who has told me many times that if she were to reincarnate, she would like to reincarnate as one of my daughters.
Well, that's a good complete answer. And Cesar.
Because they have had a wonderful trip. I mean, you know.
Good. And Cesar, we know that you have a very busy and full profession. And so we wanted to give you the opportunity, if you would like, to leave this call now while we go on to the other participants, or if you'd like to stay on in case there are other questions after them, you're welcome to. But
I wanted, actually, I have planned to be with you for the duration. Okay. So please go ahead.
All right, very good. Then in that case, we will go on to the home of Richard and Gail. Live in a nautical community, in a community that has a lot of the traditional architectural characteristics of the old New England towns. And so their own house has many of the qualities of houses that might have been built, well, in the Queen Anne revival period, perhaps about 100 years ago in New England. Here is a side entrance to their house. It's a very classic, stately, very, very beautiful house. And everywhere we see the attention to detail of Gail and Richard, for instance, in the flowers that are always in the flower boxes. Here's the back of the house. And now we're going to go inside through this glorious pair of doors. And I hope that you can see that in the two half circles of glass in the doors is etched into glass the earth, so that the implication that the whole world is my family is something that everyone is reminded of when they come into the Richard and Gail's home. And the house has the most perfect, glorious eastern view across water, really perfect Vastu quality. And this is a photograph at the time of sunrise, just to demonstrate that. Here is their kitchen. It has a large central island. The living room, they actually have two living rooms on different levels. The house is 3 stories high. And I think, and they'll perhaps talk about this, put the 3rd story in because they discovered what an extraordinary view they had when they got up on the top of the house. But this is the living room on the 1st floor, and here is the living room on the top floor, which has beautiful sort of Palladian windows looking to the east across that bay. A window seat for enjoying inside and outside. And we can see how beautiful the landscaping is around their yard, out the windows of this bay window. The central point of the house, which we call a Brahmastan, marked here with a table and roses, and behind it, the staircase leading up to the 2nd floor. A bedroom, I assume the master bedroom. If I'm wrong, you'll be able to correct me. And that's it. And so give me a second now, and I will stop sharing my screen. And Richard and Gail, would you like to tell us a little bit about your house? Would you like to tell us how old it is? How many, well, we know it's 3 stories. How many bedrooms, for instance, it has? Any of the other basics about the house?
We built it in 2009. We actually built it in a place where we were living previously. We rented a house in this community, and the owner was going to sell it, and we didn't want to move because we liked the place. It was a kind of a musty old cottage. It was made to be a summer cottage, not even made to be a year-round home, but people would, seasonalize them in this area to make them year-round home. We lived there for 9 years, and then finally some things happened that allowed us to build a house, and we'd been wanting to build a Vastu for a long time. We'd had friends who'd built Vastu. We'd been in numerous Vastus and just loved them, and had been sort of quietly biding our time, somewhat agonizingly sometimes, to when we could actually build a house. So in 2009, we destroyed our little old cottage, our musty cottage, and we built this in this location by the Connecticut shore.
Richard, you have begun. Let me then continue by asking Gail a question. What have been any changes that have occurred in your life or in your experience of life since you moved into Vastu?
Building this house, first of all, was a great adventure and lots of fun. You always hear how couples, when they build houses, often become divorced after that. But we found the opposite. We loved the process of building Vastu. And I might say, before I answer your question, I will say also that tearing down that cottage is one of the happiest moments I can remember, because just these old buildings with these vibes in them. They need to be torn down. And so I was so happy to tear it down. Living in this house has been a gift beyond words. It gives you the feeling of peaceful harmony, ease, flow, settledness, expansion. It's a blessing. It's a blessing. And the difference between the old house and this house on the same location is night and day. Absolutely night and day. This being the day. I have to say also that shortly after we built the building, we also had a UPS man come and said, "What is it about your house that I love so much coming to your house?" And he was never even inside the house, just inside the Vastu fence. And then we had a bunch of children who were riding their bikes around the neighborhood, who are usually very raucous. And they came up to me at the mailbox one day. And they said, Miss, is this your house? I said, yes. He goes, and they looked up at the house and they said, you know, every time we look at this house, it makes us feel happy. And then they drove away. So it has an effect on the environment. It has an effect on you when you're living in it. It has effect on the environment in which it sits. It's a glorious science that everybody should take advantage of.
One question that we were asked to ask is, and this could be perhaps for Richard or for Gail, and here's the question which I have not asked you ahead of time. Do you notice any difference in the quality of your relationship with your spouse?
It's hard to say. We've been together. We work together. So we're together about 24 hours a day for the last 37 years. Things are much smoother, I think, just overall. So it's hard to pick that out because it's not like we go in and out of that relationship and see the change from being at work and what coming home is like. But overall, things are they're much smoother. You just feel more at home. And by that, I mean, one example of that is, you know, before we moved into this house, we'd like to escape from time to time. And, you know, have to go somewhere and do something and see something and go on vacation if we could, which wasn't always very possible. So it was very fortunate. When you live in Vastu, one of my experiences, you have no reason to feel like you want to go anywhere because it's like you're leaving something very precious behind and you feel like you're on vacation, even, you know, all the time. It's just, there's something about living here that's just satisfying and easy, even in the midst of a lot of responsibilities and work.
I'll add something too also. You know, this whole situation with COVID-19, people are really getting reacquainted with their spouses because they're now forced to be together so often. But we're enjoying this. This is like a vacation. We're absolutely enjoying being stuck in the house, together, because it's nothing but bliss. And actually, I prefer it this way. So it hasn't been a hardship at all for us because of the environment in which we live.
With that, I think I will call on Joel to talk to us a little bit about his house. And thank you very much, Richard and Gail. And I think you'll stay on and we'll probably have questions for all of you after. And before then that I introduce Joel, I'm going to show some photographs of Joel's house. I have a particular relationship to Joel's house in that he asked me to design it, which of course I was very, very glad to do. Joel's house is also an extremely energy efficient house. And it's been quite a few years, so I don't remember all of the details now, but maybe when Joel gets on, he can tell us a little bit about the energy efficiency of the house as well as his experience of living in it. Joel, as you know, lives in the Finger Lakes in upstate New York, and it's a kind of a rustic cottage clad with wood siding. And with a garden and a pond in front of it that Joel put in. And here's the entry, and we see in the foreground, looks like double dug vegetable gardens. And Joel sent me this photograph after he first moved into the house. If you look very, very closely, where my cursor is, there is a white dove sitting on the peak of the gable of the house. And Joel can clarify this, but I think that the dove landed there exactly when he moved into this house. One more picture of the exterior of the house. And those gardens again. And now we'll go inside the house. It's a very open plan, and the living, dining, and kitchen are all one large room. And here we're looking into the living room side. The house is heated by a wood stove, which we see on the left and we'll see a close-up of. And these are extraordinarily energy efficient wood stoves and extraordinarily clean burning. And I'm very glad that Joel did the research to identify these, because I used a stove made by the same manufacturer in my own house, and I'm also very happy with it. This is another view of the living room, with the guest room and a meditation room visible through the doors. Again, the rustic cottage feeling of the house is visible in the interior, the exposed brick of the wood stove chimney and the knotty pine doors on the interior, a close-up of that stove. And here we're looking from the living room in the other direction towards dining and kitchen with a partial wall separating them. And here we see, I don't remember whether this is the guest room or the meditation room. I think this is the meditation room. Joel, can you clarify?
Yes, meditation room.
And we see through the window the outbuilding next to it with south-facing solar panels, photovoltaic electric panels. We'll probably have something to say about that. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and invite Joel to participate with us. We're longtime buddies. We knew each other when we were in school, and I helped Joel just a little bit as a laborer on the construction of a much, much, much earlier house of his. And it's lovely to be connected with you. Again, we live far apart, so we don't see each other often. And so Joel, can you tell me anything about what it's like to live in this house? First of all, why don't you tell us how big it is? We know it has one story, how many bedrooms, and tell us a little something about the energy features in this house.
Okay, it's a pleasure to be with you, John. It's about 1,500 square feet, 2 bedroom, 2 bath. One of the primary goals in building it was to have it energy efficient and low maintenance. And it's worked out quite well in that department. The solar panels that you saw on the garage roof supply on an annual basis all the power I need. The wood stove, which you mentioned, is the sole source of heat in this rather cold upstate New York climate. And the house is heated very comfortably with about somewhere between 1 and 1.5 cords of firewood a year.
Wow.
So it's very, very efficient. It's double wall construction with 9 inches of insulation in the walls and 18 inches above. And much detail, much pains were taken, the details in sealing it when it was being built. I had built houses before, but on this one I had lots of hired help, but I served as general contractor and was on the job the whole time it was being built. It was a full-time for me as well. And one of the things I was doing was paying attention to those kinds of details, making sure all the sealing, the weather sealing and so forth was done properly. And it's really paid off because it has been very inexpensive to live here, and low maintenance. One of my goals was to have no paint on the outside that had to be renewed constantly. So now the house is looking a little more weathered than it did in those earlier pictures, but still very beautiful. And what else can I tell you?
Well,
One of the things that really stands out in terms of the experience of living here, I wasn't sure how I was going to survive financially, other than very inexpensive, try to, and part of the goal in building the house was to, make it very cheap to live here. We were fortunate to have the money to be able to build the house and not have any debt, but I didn't have much income. And after the house was done, and I was sort of, wondering how this was all going to work, out of the blue, a job offer came that fulfilled my highest aspiration, which had always been to be able to work full-time teaching the Transcendental Meditation technique, working in the TM organization, but also live in a beautiful place in the country. So I grew up in the country in upstate New York, and living with nature was a big part of my desire. And that was just remarkable. And I've been more comfortable financially than ever in my life in the 10, 11 years that I've been living here. And I really attribute it to the support that comes from living in a fortune-creating building. It really, really worked for me.
Joel, can you think back 10 or 11 years, and can you sum it up for us what it was like to first enter the house? Now, we know that you were there every day as it was built, and so there wouldn't have been much of a contrast on a physical level when the house was done and you inaugurated it and moved in. And so I'm curious whether on anything other than this physical level, where it must have just seemed just like it had been the day before, whether from that point forward you felt any difference.
As you suggest, the contrast wasn't so great, because I did all of the interior work myself with my own hands. And so after the first, after the initial major work was done, concrete and framing and roof and siding and so forth, I took over entirely and finished everything myself. And so my consciousness, my handwork is in everything. So it's really an expression of me to a very large extent. So I think it's easier for me to point out, as Richard and Gail did, and others, and Cesar, that it's the real contrast is noticed by other people. We had various open houses, local green building tour we were on 2 or 3 years. And so we had lots of visitors. And some of the visitors who were fairly near neighbors, but who had never actually been in the house and who we'd never actually met before. A couple of them said that they were driving by the house as it was being built, and they felt something. They felt some energy coming from the house, even as it was being built. And it was a great fulfillment to them then to be able to, actually experience the house fully after that. But that was a pretty common experience. And you mentioned the birds. The dove, I'd actually forgotten about the white dove that showed up soon after the house was built. But we've had a number of interesting bird phenomena over the years that just strange things, Great blue herons, 3 of them perching in the cedar tree just outside the Vastu, never seen such a thing before. Another time there were something like 200 crows that were doing what appeared to be just a game, flying in this, all in this swirly pattern right above the house. Something else I'd never seen before. And of course, there's the rainbows, fabulous rainbows often.
Well, let me take a quick look at questions.
John, I was going to say that I remember
Yes.
Joel relating to us because it went into one of our e-news articles, a story from the first, green building tour that they had at the house. And he told the story of a young boy who had kind of been dragged along to all of the different houses with his mother or his parents. And he kind of plunked himself out on the porch. And when his parents went to find him, he said, "No, I think I want to stay here."
I'd forgotten that story. Yes.
Well, Susan or Celia, do you want to ask of our assembled panel any questions that have come in from our audience?
Yes, there's one very good question here. Can the Vastu principles be applied to second floor and basement also? My understanding is that it's only applied to one floor houses. And obviously, these are not all one floor houses.
Yes, I'll go ahead and take that. And first of all, I also want to explain to the audience that there is some technical issue that we haven't been able to troubleshoot that's going on with Celia's computer. And every once in a while when she speaks, we hear a kind of rushing sound. She doesn't hear it, but we do. And she's tried unplugging everything around her computer, and yet it just happened, and it happens from time to time. We haven't solved it yet.
Sorry, some internet connections.
Yeah, that's okay. And the answer to the question is that the principles of right placement of what goes where in a house so as to take advantage of the appropriate one of the differing qualities of the sun's energy can be applied on any story of a house. It is certainly perfectly feasible to build a multi-story house, just as Gail and Richard and Cesar have done.
I just want to make just one point that I didn't when it was my turn to talk. Building Vastu gives you an opportunity to build your exoskeleton. So we're all born with an endoskeleton, but we actually have an opportunity to build that shell around us that actually, if we do it right, then it becomes a perfect skeleton. And that's the way I see my Vastu and Vastu in general, is the opportunity to build a perfect exoskeleton. I actually would recommend anyone, I would recommend that they should try it. And it actually, for me, it worked, beautifully, like every part of it. As I incorporate this Vedic knowledge, it actually just works. It's just the way it goes.
Sweet, beautiful,
A
beautiful.
medical analogy.
How appropriate. Any other questions from the audience?
I think there are some questions that have come in, but I think they've been answered. Such
Okay.
as, effects you feel on your intellect, your health, your overall sense of being enriched.
But
Does
there is-
anyone want to comment on that, Gail?
We've been teaching our meditation in this house for 10 years. And I have noticed, we both noticed, many healings have taken place with people who are coming to learn the meditation before they actually learn the meditation, just by walking in the house. I'll give you an example. There was a young man, 14 years old, who got in a very bad skiing accident, broke his femur in a couple of different areas, and terrible concussion. So he came in that morning with a very terrible headache, scheduled to learn his meditation technique. And he said to me, "I don't think it's a very good time for me to learn because I have such a terrible headache." And I said, "Don't worry, come right in, have a seat." And in 5 minutes, he looks up, he's filling out some forms. In 5 minutes, he looks up and he says to me, "My headache is completely gone. What is going on here?" I said, oh, it's just the house. The house has a healing effect. And he went on to be successfully learning to. So and we see this all the time, that healing takes place. So when you ask about health, sure, there's little things that happen now and then with the health, but nowhere near what they used to be prior to building the house. So it's a very protective thing for mental health, physical health. Also, I have to say that my dearest mother of 97 years, she was 97 years old, passed away a few weeks ago. And had I not been in this house, living in this house with the experience of my mother passing away, this house made it so much more comfortable for me to deal with that, because I knew I could come back here into this environment that was nurturing, peaceful, and supportive. And it has made a major difference with such a huge loss.
Thank you, Gail. Do any of the others of you, Joel or Richard or Cesar, have any last thoughts about living in your houses that came to mind while somebody else was talking that you want to share?
Well, I just have one more thing, and that is that if you like to cook, there is absolutely no better kitchen.
Yes.
Well, if you like to eat. So, music, just beauty, taste, smell, we love to cook at our home.
And this is my own experience also. I always cooked just as much as I had to so that I was nourished. But since I've been in Vastu, I take such pleasure in doing anything for the house. And I take such pleasure in doing the things that I can do in this house for me. And that particularly includes cooking and even washing the dishes. Everything is just joyful being in this house.
I'll just mention a little anecdote from what, as Gail said, we teach TM, and so we have our meditation students come. We have two locations. We have an office where we give lectures, and we have some of our teaching here. And many of our students, even though it's a lot further for them to come, will also always request, can we have our meeting at your house? That third floor living room that Jon mentioned is actually the location where we it's reserved for teaching TM and our TM meetings. And we had one student, like I said, a lot of them want to make the extra travel and come there. And we've had some remark on it overwhelmingly. And one of them, there was this one woman would always say, call it the magic house. Gail's student, she would just say, she would always refer to it as the magic house. Can we come to the magic house? Just because of the feeling she got while she was in here. So it's very common for people to notice that there's something special when they walk in the door.
And with that comment about the magic house, I don't think we could have a better way to draw this session to a close. And so I want to thank Richard and Gail and Joel and Cesar for participating with us today. And it's been a pleasure for me to host you.
There are several other questions that have come in, and not so much related to people's experiences. These are questions more for Jon, but I feel like we should answer them if we can. If our guest panelists want to, sign off, they can. Jon, would you like to answer a few of these questions quickly?
You bet. And again, Gail, Joel, Richard, and Cesar, feel free to disconnect. We'll stay on for just a couple more minutes. One question I see is, can Maharishi Vastu Homes be oriented only to the east or to the north? The answer to that is yes, that is correct, because we understand that because of the rotation of the earth about its axis from east to west, and the fact that the sun passes overhead, therefore, the rotation of the earth is from west to east, and therefore the passage of the sun, the most primary, powerful element of natural law affecting the surface of the earth, passes overhead from east to west. the direction that we face and the direction that our exoskeletons, our environments face, have differing effects upon us. And this is to do with the rotation of the earth and the passage of the sun overhead. And we could say there are 8 directions, 4 cardinal and 4 diagonal. And of those 8, there are only 2 that have completely beneficial effects upon us. One is due east and one is due north. Another question that has come in is, does Vastu say also anything to do with the number, size, and orientation of bathrooms? And the answer regarding number and size, not really addressed. That would be according to your desires, your budget, and function. Orientation, yes, there are ideal locations to face using some of the primary fixtures, and there are also specific locations within a house where it's more and less nourishing to have a bathroom. The next question is, what premium is typically required for construction costs when building a Vastu home? I could throw this question open to our panelists, but they're not necessarily the best ones to answer it because each of them have either built only a single house or 2 or 3 houses. And maybe Susan and I can take a crack at this from our much larger database of experience of building Vastu compared to non-Vastu. There is a premium. The absolute minimum is about 5%, but 10% is a more common minimum. It can be somewhat more, and that is something that you have quite a bit of control over, because there are aspects of Vastu that you can choose to incorporate that are not necessary. And so you have a certain amount of control over the premium that accompanies construction of a Maharishi Vastu house. I think if you think about something like 10%, you're probably in the right ballpark.
I would be sad, John, that what many people who have built Vastu homes may ascribe to a premium for Vastu is actually a premium for the level of finishes that they have chosen, because people tend to go for more refined things, and more refined things, you know, flooring and more refined fixtures and appliances and those kinds of things can bring a premium to the home, but they are not Vastu requirements.
That's right. And another point is that it is very common when people build Vastu that they're building a custom house. And custom houses cost more than what we would call production houses, houses that are built in multiples in large volume. And this is seen in Fairfield, Iowa, where we have a community, North Campus Village, which is being built in a production mode. And Gail and Richard own 2 Vastus, and one of them is in North Campus Village. And right now, the houses, which are townhouses that are being built in North Campus Village through a production process of great efficiency, are being sold for something like about $105 per square foot, and that includes the lot and all of the site utilities. And they're very nice houses. And it is extremely challenging to be able to buy a new, nice townhouse for that price anywhere. So part of the premium goes away when Vastu is being built in volume. The next question is from a dear professional associate of mine, Rich Ringus. Hello, Rich. Your question, and you live in North Campus Village, is about the Brahmastan and what is its function and is it important? And we may want to talk to you outside of the webinar about the nature of the Brahmastan in your unit in the North Campus Village townhouses. We'll make a note to do that. Maybe you can even call into our office. What I will say in general terms, the Brahmastan is, the word is a Sanskrit word. Brahm means wholeness, stan means established. And so a Brahmastan is the point or spot at the center of any structure of nature that establishes and maintains that structure. So if you look at many of the structures of nature, galaxies, solar systems, stars, planets, cells, molecules, atoms, each one has a central core, and all of the activity of the structure occurs around that core, and the core maintains the stability of the structure. This is an element of nature's own architecture, and it maintains the relationship between the parts in the structure and the wholeness of nature's organizing intelligence. And we emulate that pattern. The Brahmastan in a Vastu house resonates with that pattern and helps to similarly maintain the relationship between that structure and those of us who occupy it, and the totality of nature's organizing intelligence. It's a very abstract concept, and yet it's a perfectly real concept that we see in all of the architecture of nature. And another question, do colors in the house matter? We're coming up to 1 hour, but we won't go over an hour, but I see a couple of other questions. Do colors in the house matter? And what I will say about that is we understand from the natural law-based medical system, which is Ayurveda, also from the Vedic tradition, that different colors have differing effects of increasing or decreasing one of the three constituent qualities which combine to make up life. We call these three qualities the doshas. They are Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And each of these three are present in particular ratios in every life form, in every human being. And different colors tend to aggravate or to vitiate the doshas. And so certain colors, not all colors, if they are saturated, if they are strong, if they fill a room, will have an impact upon the balance of the doshas of the physiology that's occupying that room. And because our exact doshic balance, our vikriti, varies at times of the day and at times of the year and at times of our life and between one and another occupant of a house, the wisest thing is to use colors in a house that will not have strong effects upon the doshas. And therefore we recommend not to use strong saturated colors. And the last question, I think it's the last one. Well, I see more, but we're about at time, so I'll just do this as the last question. Is there some way to protect the Vastu home and residents from lightning? I will give two answers to that. When we build Vastu, we use all of the common sense skills and knowledge that we have in any building tradition. We don't ignore any of the wisdom of science and engineering when we build Vastu. And if we're in a region that recommends the use of lightning rods, then we would certainly install a lightning rod also in a Maharishi Vastu home. Having said that, I will also say that it seems to be a very true thing that there is a quality of protection, of coherence, of the reduction of the possibility of incoherent influences to enter from outside into the Vastu yard and into the Vastu home. This is not something which is easy to subject to a double-blind medical study, so we can't make it as an absolute claim. But it is certainly the subjective experience of many, many, many of the people who live in Vastu. And so if we think about threats in the environment such as lightning, we want to take all wise precautions to minimize them. And then we can know that in addition to that, we have some additional measure of security because we're living in a natural law structured residence, a perfect Maharishi Vastu. And so thank you very much for joining us today. I appreciate this. Celia, thank you so much for hosting us. And as Celia said, We look forward to joining you again next month. And my thanks once again to Richard, Gail, Joel, and Cesar. Thanks so much, and we'll see you in a month.
If you have a question that didn't get answered, feel free to email us through the contact form on our website, www.maharishivastu.org, and we'll get back to you.